Oh, not much. Summertime, the good old stuff, trying to beat the heat.
Well, there's a lot going on because you just came off vacation. Nate Longshore just came off vacation. We talked to Nate this week, so we're going to build the podcast around the tight ends room. If you haven't heard the podcast in the previous weeks, we talked about the running back room and the wide receiver room. But before we get to some of the clips of the Nate Longshore conversation, I did want to mention some basketball news because we did talk to Kevin Kruger this week. That's up on our UNLV All Access Twitter and also our Learfield podcast page. Jamal Williams checked in. He's one of the assistant coaches. His interview was really good as well. A lot of details on this roster. I think a lot of people aren't aware of who they brought in exactly, and the Boone twins and Jalen Hill. Everyone knows who DJ Thomas is. They just got what they think is a freshman who possibly could contribute this year. You've got another freshman, that's Jacob Benarby. You got Brooklyn Hicks in as a freshman. He was a commit a while ago. And, of course, Robert Whaley, who is a Barkley-type player. I'm not saying he's going to be Charles Barkley, but that kind of build of like 6'5" and 240 pounds and can jump through the roof. Non-con schedule, Caleb, was pretty interesting as it's coming together here. Nothing has been officially announced, but they are going to play a game at Dayton. They're going to play in Daytona, Florida. They're going to take on Colorado, and then they will take on the winner-loser, depending on how the Rebels do, of the Florida State-Richmond game. They've got a game in Malibu at Pepperdine. They're in Phoenix against St. Mary's. They've got home tilts. And those are the games we don't know about all of them yet in terms of the non-con, but they're going to play Loyola Marymount in town. I think that's at the DLC. And then they play Creighton, which will be a top 25 team going into the season. That one's going to be at the DLC. So it's coming together here, and hopefully the schedule is out in the next couple of weeks. But anyone who complained last year, there were some people, and rightly so, who complained about the schedule in the non-con, and the Rebels were able to roll out to I think it was a 12-1 start. This is a much more difficult schedule, and you get the feeling that Kevin Kruger felt a lot more confident in this group. And I'm not saying he promised an incoming freshman that the schedule would be boosted, but I think that's part of it, that DJ Thomas is here, and let's make sure this young man gets to play a lot of really tough games and at home and out on the road. So pretty encouraging. That's a gauntlet, the list I just named.
Yeah, it's good for the exposure element for, like you said, young guys or recruits that were highly recruited like DJ to get that exposure still, especially when you look at a team like Creighton, who obviously finished in the Elite Eight. I believe they got bounced out by San Diego State in a nail-biter. Kind of made a name for themselves on a national stage last year in recent history. So getting them on the schedule at home will be, good for exposure for the program. And it's more of a testing, a non-con schedule. Obviously, last year it felt good to win, and I think that was kind of the intention of I guess, the quote-unquote cupcake non-con schedule was kind of get some wins under your belt as a young program with some players that were maybe new to the program. The roster wasn't as solidified as maybe you'd like it to be before you start getting risky with the non-con. But this year, I think they're confident. This shows, I guess, the progression, maybe not where you want to be as far as the overall strength of it and feeling confident about winning most of the games. But still, this schedule with those names, some of those teams that you mentioned, Colorado, FSU, the bigger teams, the Power 5 schedules getting out there, and Creighton, obviously, what they did last year makes them a formidable opponent this year. So we'll see what it looks like. I'm excited again about Rebel basketball. My son was telling me that, my mother-in-law, she's a very big Running Rebel fan, so she has like Running Rebel games on all the time when she's watching the kids. And my son's like, they play here, they play in town. I was like, yeah, that's at the Thomas and Mack. They play at the Mack. Let's go see some games. She's like, I want to go watch them. So we'll probably be at some basketball games. Hopefully that Creighton game I'll be at. So it'll be a fun season.
All right, well, let's get into football a little bit. First of all, fall camp starts up here in early August. August 4th is report date. August 5th, we get some media availability. I ask you all the time as the clock ticks down here towards camp, what's it like for players? You only have a couple of weeks to sort of get ready, and then once camp starts, man, they go full bore right from the get-go.
It's always exciting, the build up to a new season, a new fall camp, because you get to finally put to test the work that you've done all off season, right? Like the spring, the summer, you've been working on your individual game, you've been more on your own than, I guess, around the team. Although that is a little different these days with the new rules, with the coaches being able to be around the players. But you've still done a lot of individual work that you want to be able to bring back and show off and showcase in the fall and hopefully hit the ground running and make an impression for yourself. It's always a new chance to maybe make an adjustment, make a move up the roster, get some more exposure, get some more playing time. Usually coming back for your second or third fall, you're a little bit more experienced. It's not as new to you. I remember the freshman deer in the headlight looks when you come in and you're around all these grown men for the first time, and it's like, oh boy, like what did I get myself into? So most of that's just learning and trying to keep up. But as an upperclassman, the more you've got under your belt, the more fall camps you've been to, the more comfortable you are and more confident you are coming into it. You kind of know the drill, you know the routine, and you're able to just play loose and play free in that fall camp and have fun around your guys. And it's always fun. I mean, there's so many stories about football. It sucks, and some of the grind and the struggle of it is what you immediately think of. But then when you start digging through, some of the most fun times around football and around your college career happen during fall camp. I can't tell you how many stories I've got, some inappropriate for the air, but that really speak to the brotherhood that's built during football. And fall camp is one of those places. It's a grind. It sucks, especially here in Vegas. It's going to be hot. It's going to be a struggle for these guys in early August to get going, but that's a part of the game. And you build character, you build relationships through that struggle. And hopefully you build a good football team through that struggle. And we'll see what this fall camp produces. But I'm excited to see what the Rebels look like here in the fall.
I'm glad you mentioned the camaraderie and the stories and those special times during camp. I'm going to take it to the extreme because I never got a chance to talk to you about what was going on at Northwestern and the allegations.
I can't really explain why we're still doing it. I understand that it's there. I think there's a uniformity thing that maybe coaches are still going for, that have this mindset where they want everybody to look the same. It's kind of my way or the highway mentality. And it's been proven time and time again that doesn't have to be the case. I think it works in some situations. We can't deny that uniformity is sometimes a good thing, and the militance of it. And obviously you see that more in Air Force than anywhere else, or in any of the service schools, Army, Air Force, Navy. Those schools have sort of a uniformity about them that comes with the gig. But it doesn't have to be the case in sports everywhere. Even those schools have sort of loosened the reins in terms of sports and what they allow to happen on the field of play or with their sports teams. But it's like you said, antiquated, and that's the best way to describe it. The theories of yesteryear, where you have to do things a certain way, you have to look a certain way, you have to behave a certain way in order to be a productive member of society or just a productive player on a football team. It's just nonsense. You can have discipline and look different, right? You can be a great football player and not have the same off the field mentality as every other guy in the program. Your race doesn't have anything to do with it. When you talk about things like hazing, I think the introduction into a team, the rite of passage, so to speak, is still an element that I think is necessary. But I don't think hazing is something that's necessary or ever was necessary. I think, a young guy coming in has to be broken into the ways of a tradition, or the traditions of a football team that you maybe have established, or the way that the upperclassmen understand how to work and how to grind, how to become productive. And that's part of fall camp. That's what every freshman goes through, and just realizing that as a young player, going from being the best player on your team to now being one of the lower players on your team is often a tough transition. And it feels like hazing sometimes when done right. It feels like, you're woken up to this whole new world where you're the bottom of the barrel and you have to climb your way up. And that's fine. When you talk about going into a dark room and violating people and being wrapped up in saran wrap and in front of your players in the locker room and everybody, this kind of bullying tactics where the coach is in on it and saying, these accusations that were made, that the coach is like giving signals during practice of who's messing up so that they can get put on a list later on to get hazed and get punished, I guess, quote unquote, punished by the team. And it's appropriate and everybody's laughing and making that's not necessary. That's not a part of football. That's not a part of the camaraderie of football, right? That this kind of organized bullying is basically what the accusations kind of led to. That culture can be tolerated. I don't think it's necessary. I don't think that's what football is. I think the locker room gets a bad rep when you start talking about stuff like that, because that's not what good locker rooms are, right? It doesn't have to be that kind of extreme hazing. Now, there can be joking around, jiving, boys being boys at that age. Of course, that's something that's going to happen. But this level of what the accusations are, this level of organized hazing and organized humiliation of young players just can't be tolerated. If true, these things, should carry harsh punishment, obviously, and we need to get it out of our game, especially in 2023, where you think we're past this kind of thing and we can just focus on football. But it's still there. Obviously, there's still accusations being made and still this level of discomfort around some programs and some cultures, and it's got to go away because football suffers for it.
Well, finding a balance in life is really important to a work and lifestyle balance, and part of that is making sure you take some vacation. And when you're a football coach or a football player, you got to take some breaks here and there because you can't go 12 months a year. It's a mental grind. Most of them are off during the month of July. There's got to be a couple of coaches around to monitor the program. And this week's coach at the FFC is Nate Longshore. So Nate joined us on ESPN Las Vegas on Cofield and Company locally, and we were asking him about taking some time off.
No, we got away. We went to Yellowstone for a little bit, spent some time out there. Not much of a snowbird, so I go up there when the sun's shining. It's nice.
So what is Yellowstone like now? Because I've read it, like it's blown up in terms of the people there. Like, can you still enjoy it? I mean, does it feel like it's overrun, or it's still very natural?
Oh no, it's very much an amusement park at this point. I mean, there's people everywhere.
Yeah, it's like social media has really blown up Yellowstone, right? And that's kind of the pros and cons of social media, right? You get to see all these wonderful places, but then a lot of people would go there now that maybe didn't even know of the beauty of the place, right? I mean, there's still people trying to take selfies with buffaloes, and I think we've got to stop that. You can tell the kind of tourists that are coming through that don't really have experience with wildlife doing that kind of thing. But no, Yellowstone is on my list of places to visit. I think there's definitely some the geysers and all that stuff that are on the list of things that you must see, especially growing up in America and learning about it. You just want to see those things, right? But it has become sort of the Disneyland of the outdoors. And it's funny because I just went to Disneyland for my vacation. I'm kind of programmed like a football player, I guess, or like my vacation schedule is around the same. And so my family has to go on vacation around the same time as if I was playing football and trying to get it in before the season starts and all that stuff. So, but we went to Disneyland, and the crowds there are always, bad. But you expect that at Disneyland, right? Like, it's always been that way. And there's ways to avoid the crowds, and I do that. I spend the money. I know I'm a sucker. Take my money to Disneyland. My kids love it, so I will continue to pay it. But we pay to skip lines. We pay to have the best experience, but to avoid the crowds. I don't know what you do at Yellowstone to avoid the crowds, because I imagine that taking a picture with nature with hundreds of, if not thousands of people in the background just makes nature not feel natural, right? Like, it's like, you guys aren't natural to this environment. Why are there thousands of you, especially the ones taking selfies with buffaloes and with the other wildlife there and thinking it's like cute and cool for the gram? Like, it's different. I want to go and be a part of nature where it's like just me and the sticks, a couple of my loved ones, maybe actually in a tent outside and sleep overnight. That's the way you want to do outdoors. I don't know how valid that would be in Yellowstone. Obviously, it's different there. There's some more extreme wildlife than in your local mountains, but I'd love to do it. And I'm kind of envious of Coach Longshore for being able to do that. It's on my list. Hopefully I get there soon.
Nate Longshore, the tight ends coach for UNLV, joined us. We have a bunch of clips from the interview to kind of break down and set you up on looking into the tight ends room. First thing we got to get out of the way is Nate Longshore was one of the holdovers, along with Damon McAdoo, from the last staff, from the Arroyo staff. That is a little bit unusual, and we asked Longshore about staying around because, hey, it's a two-way street. Odom wants you. Do you want to stay at UNLV?
There's definitely some limbo there. You're not quite sure. You're putting out calls and trying to see what all your options are at the same time. You've got your wife and family and friends, and they like what they've got going on, and she's got her work too, and it's an elaborate kind of delicate dance. And I had known Coach Odom. We have a few mutual friends, and they had all spoke very highly of him. So I kind of made an effort to, if I had the opportunity, I want to be retained and I want to stick around and try to see this thing through. So the opportunity arose, and I was excited and thrilled to be a part of it.
You start to picture and start to get a real idea of what goes into these decisions, right? You think about the coaches and the freedom to move. And we always think about it, I guess, these days in terms of the coaches having the freedom to change programs, to pick up and move whenever they wanted to, and juxtaposing that against the players who didn't really have that freedom. But you get a look at maybe a coach with a family and how difficult that must be by force, I guess, by the firing of the old staff, to have to make a decision to say, am I picking up and leaving? I'm a free agent now. Am I picking up and leaving, or am I trying to stay here? Am I trying to make sure things are comfortable for my family? And being a family man now, that's obviously one of the things I consider with everything I do is how will it impact my wife and my kids? Picking up your kids and moving them to a different school just through my internet research here as a new dad is like one of the most stressful, impactful things on a kid's life. So you're thinking about that when you have kids, when you have a family. It's like, am I going to really uproot my family who's maybe gotten a little comfortable over the last couple of years in this location? Do I really want to pull them up and take them somewhere else that's vastly different than where we are on a whim, and maybe just be there for a couple of years and then become a journeyman while I'm picking up my family every single time? So just that aspect of it is different based on your situation, obviously, as a coach, as a person, but it just gives you a look at listening to Coach Longshore talk about that. It gives you a feel sort of the things that go into making that decision. It's not just about what he wants to do or his career aspirations. It's, very much concerned with what his wife has going on, what his family has going on, and that influencing his decision. Obviously, being a holdover has its benefits. And there's been, a couple of holdovers throughout every coaching staff where you had that kind of transitional coach who's been around the program and helps because he's familiar with the program and with the area maybe, or with recruiting trails. He has sort of a lay of the land, so to speak. And Coach Kamir was one of those coaches. He'd been around through a couple of coaching staffs, me being included, as why that kind of transitional coach for, the new coaches coming in and having those roots laid. So there's that aspect. I'm sure that was helpful for Coach Odom with the roster and re-recruiting the guys who were already in the locker room. But then there's the element of saying, hey, I could go further in my career. I am highly coveted. I am sought after as a coach. I've done some good things, and I'm sure he probably could have landed somewhere else. But because of his situation, thought it best for him to stay and be a part of UNLV and help continue to build, and not just with UNLV, the program, but with his family and his home life.
So the room looks like this right now. Shelton Zeon is back, probably as a starter. He's a fifth-year guy. Christian Earls is in as a JUCO. Christian is 6'8", 255. Shelton 6'4", 250. Charlie Williams in as a post-grad freshman. He's 6'4", 240. Kaleo Balangay is back as a junior, 6'6", 260. And they've got a freshman, Cooper Haswell, who's a smaller guy, developmental guy, within the mix. So it's not a super deep room. A lot's going to be expected of Shelton Zeon. A lot's going to be expected of Earls and Williams. Here's Nate Longshore talking about Shelton Zeon kind of developing into a guy who can do everything on the field.
The progress that he's made since I've been here, going into year 4 now, and seeing the progression of his career and his development, he really took ownership and being a point of attack blocker last year and was one of the better blocking tight ends in the conference. I think now with adding some elements to the passing game, being able to incorporate his speed and athleticism into the passing game and get him as a downfield threat should round out his NFL prospect, bio.
Yeah, and I think that was a product of last season where he had to focus on blocking a lot more in the system with Coach Arroyo. That's just the way he was utilized. And I think Shelton showed that he has a capability. I remember he had a couple of deep shots down the field that contribute to his average, over 10 yards a catch. While the catches aren't that plentiful, he definitely made his impact down the field and showed his ability to stretch the field. There was one where he really had to go up and get it in traffic. And I think it actually got reviewed as an incompletion, maybe an interception fumble, I think was the case, if I remember correctly. That was at Allegiant Stadium. I can't recall the details of that, but just going downfield and stretching in between defenders showed what he could do and what his size and speed, being able to get downfield for a tight end. It can be something that you can utilize a little bit more in the passing game. Hopefully that's the case with Shelton. His 5th year, he's obviously been around the block. He's learned a lot. He's no stranger to fall camp and what is required of him. And unfortunately, he'll have to learn a new system. So there may be a little bit of a slower step than you'd like to in your 5th year, in your kind of curtain call year. But hopefully he's able to put it on display, being familiar with the playbook from the spring and working through the summer. And so that the fall comes around, he's able to hit it full speed and really make his mark, because he's going to be relied on. I think the leadership in the room is one thing. There's a lot of young guys who are going to be looking to him, and the coaches are going to be looking to him to be kind of another coach, another voice on the field and in the film room to make sure the young guys are establishing good habits. So that's one aspect that he'll have to be relied on for. But then physically on the field, his size, his maturity as a player, it will definitely be an advantage for him. And I think he already had some mismatch capabilities where he was a bigger guy who was able to move downfield. So you think of him as a blocking tight end, and maybe the film on him is that he's a blocking tight end because that's what he was used for. But he does have some speed. He does have some top end speed to get over the top if he's matched up with a slower linebacker, like he may very well be oftentimes, to be able to make that mismatch in the passing game. And I would like to see. I've always said, and you've heard me say this, that the tight end is the quarterback's best friend, and he's one of those pass catchers that you can look to just be a mismatch and get an easy completion when you're in a rut as a quarterback. And I think, you look at some of the success of NFL tight ends as of late, those guys who were able to catch the ball and run good routes, they become prominent wide receivers. And it's partly because of the mismatch. And I think tight ends like Zeon have the ability to be a mismatch. And we'll see if the others down the roster can develop into that too. I know Charlie Williams is one of those guys who they think can be. But we'll see. We'll see how it develops for Zeon and if he can be a reliable, pass catcher for the quarterbacks and for Doug Brumfield, who's going to be the starter by all indications. And their relationship and that they've built over the last couple of seasons will be able to shine through because I think the tight end should be the quarterback's best friend.
Here's Nate Longshore talking about the aforementioned Charlie Williams, more of the pass catcher, and the big fella, Christian Earls.
I would say those guys are different. I think we've got Balunge, who is similar to Earls. They're both 6'7", 6'8", basketball guys with range and elite ball skills, kind of mismatch type of guys. Shelton Zeon's your traditional wide balance. He can help you in the run game, the pass game, a little bit of everything. Charlie Williams is he's a big receiver. I mean, he was one of those taller receivers that kept working out in the weight room and became a tight end. So his route skills and his ability to separate as a receiver kind of put him in a different class of his own in my room. He's still got a ways to go. He's young, but is having that extra 6 months as a high schooler, getting here early to get ready for the season, I definitely see him contributing this fall.
Yeah, Christian Earls is huge. He's massive, right? And just seeing him on the field during the spring was good times for me. Obviously, he'll be on it, and it may just be for intimidation factor, right? He may be capable just as Zeon or whoever ends up getting the start, but just sometimes having a guy out there that's that big kind of does something to the psyche of the defense. There was a package we were kind of talking about during the spring where you had Christian Earls lined up right next to Jesus, and it was Jacob De Jesus, and it was like that was like the most contrast in size for players that you can ever imagine, right? And De Jesus was lined up behind Earls. It was like, well, is that intentional to hide him behind him because 6'8", and I don't know what they got De Jesus listed at, but he's definitely small compared to him, right? So those kind of things would definitely play a part in the package. Just having him down there, even in the red zone, tight end scoring wasn't there for UNLV last year. Having him down in the red zone and mismatched with, whoever's out there with him, 6'8", just throwing it up and going and getting more of a basketball guy. So he's going to be familiar with going up and rebounding the ball, so to speak, down there in the red zone. So that's always something you have in your back pocket when you got a guy with his size. Charlie Williams is somebody I'm intrigued by as somebody who grew into, through the words of Coach Longshore, being a tight end, just a receiver who lifted too much weight, ate a little bit too much, and got a little heavier to be considered a receiver, but now is a tight end. So you think of a guy who creates that sort of mismatch, and it's just another tool in the belt of an offensive coordinator, right? You got a tight end that, creates that kind of mismatch. You think about guys like Travis Kelce, who are now the most famous tight end in the NFL. Obviously, winning has a lot to do with that, but his route running ability, his speed, his ability to separate from linebackers creates a real issue just for packages and your matchups with your defense, right? You want to try to keep as many linebackers on the field as you can, but if you got tight ends that can run routes like receivers, you don't want them lined up in coverage with a split out tight end. A lot of trade personnel or a lot of 12 personnel where two tight ends can run routes. Now what do you do as a defensive coordinator, right? If Charlie Williams can really be that guy that spreads the field and runs crisp routes like a receiver, then that's, again, a quarterback's best friend because he's going to be lined up, matched up against inside linebackers a lot of times, and him running just a simple out route as crisp as a wide receiver creates immense separation and make an easy target for quarterbacks. So we'll see if that ends up being the case. Obviously, younger, he has some time to grow and develop into a better collegiate player. He's going to have to put on some muscle, some strength with that size, so he's able to block because every tight end is going to have to block it. I think everybody on the field offensively is going to have to be able to block at some level. So that's going to be something he's going to have to adjust to blocking in college versus at his high school level. And from the tight end position is going to be tough. But I'm excited for the potential of where he could go, how much he can contribute in the fall. Obviously, the head start, being here months early, is going to play huge benefits for him. But can he contribute immediately? He's going to be one of those younger guys that if he's able to show it during the fall, that he's grasped the playbook, that he's strong enough, that he's willing to block, we could see him making an impact in the season as well.
And then there is the constant question we ask. I think it's important with the go-go offense.
I mean, honestly, across college football, very much everybody's kind of doing the same thing. You know, you're trying to exploit matchups, create leverage, find some numbers somewhere. You do this as many hours as we do as coaches, and it's all the same stuff. You're trying to get somebody open and score a touchdown. You know, sometimes we take it for granted trying to tell the kids that it's all the same stuff. It's not quite the same to them.
Right.
But, you know, the nuance and understanding kind of, you know, what we're trying to do is...
I think it as with every offense and learning it, the language is the most difficult part. Some of the concepts maybe you understand, right? Like a high-low, the seams down the middle, how you're trying to stretch defense laterally or vertically based on the concept you're running downfield. A lot of that is the same. It's similar. What you're trying to do. There's only so much you can do, right, with the limits of football as far as what the end goal is, what you're trying to achieve, how you're trying to stress a defense, whether it's laterally or vertically. Those things I think remain constant. So once you see it, you know, you can probably go into any offensive meeting room and see a play drawn up on the board that looks exactly like a play you've seen before, right? The four vertical concept, for instance, it hasn't changed in decades. What you're trying to do, whether you're going out of 2x2 or 3x1, you're going to see the same end result. You're trying to put a pressure on a middle safety to make a decision on one of the seams down the middle. And if he goes this way, you're going to throw the other way. If it's cover two, you usually have a bender, what they call a concept where somebody ends up running towards the middle of the field and the other ends up stressing the hash marks and creating a space in the middle. So that those are kind of things that are really fundamental to every offense, the kind of concepts that you want to have. If you're running crossing routes underneath, how you're trying to stretch laterally the defense and put the linebackers in a bind on. If they get caught chasing through their zone, then there's an opening behind them. Those kind of things are pretty much mainstays in college football and sports in general and the NFL level as well. Obviously, there's things you can do at the higher levels because there's more speed, there's more time in the pocket. You have quarterbacks with stronger arms and so on and so forth. So it gets a little bit more complicated as you go on, but the basic concepts are the same. And what you're trying to achieve with these different concepts is the same. The language, I think, of the go-go offense and then the presentation of it may look a little different. I think formationally, obviously, we saw a lot of that during the spring with the two running backs to the same side of the shotgun quarterback is something that's new. It takes a little bit of adjusting to. The shifts and the motions, maybe for the tight ends, may be a little bit more involved than in traditional offenses. And we saw the tight ends moving across formation pre-snap a little bit more, I guess, than traditional offenses would. So there's a bit of a load for the tight ends there. But I think there is some concepts that are new and different with the go-go offense, and that being, you know, one of the more new offenses. You expect that, right? With some twists and turns, some nuance that is going to be different than your old school, traditional, maybe more widespread college systems. There's going to be some nuance, but I think overall, once you get a sense of the language that's new, I think the concepts and understanding your role and your position are going to be the same for the tight ends, especially. What you're expected to do is be able to block in the run game, obviously, be heavily influenced in the play action pass game, and then also to create mismatches. And how can you take advantage of the mismatches when they present themselves? I think understanding that as a tight end, like being able to look at a formation and say, oh, I'm going to have a mismatch here. I better win on this route because the quarterback's going to be looking for me. Those kinds of things. And I think we did see a sneak peek of the tight ends being relied on to stretch the ball down the field, whether it's just through what we used to call health routes, because you're just running a route knowing that you're just trying to pull a safety out for somebody coming underneath you. That's what we call the health route back in the day. You're just running that route as hard as you can, getting some conditioning in the game. But some tight ends we saw going down the field and stretching it vertically out of 3x1 sets. So they're going to be involved, and how quickly they can grasp that and conceptualize that from that position is, I think, going to play a lot into why they're going to get playing time. And Zeon, being an older guy, I think he'll be the quickest to grasp the playbook and that understanding of what a tight end should be doing and what a tight end is required to do in any offense, but especially in the go-go.
All right, Caleb, good job. We'll talk to everyone next week.